So hello and welcome, Tashi Delay. This is the second episode of Tibet Unlocked, the podcast. My name is Laden Tetong. I'm here in Boston, the director of Tibet Action Institute, a Tibetan Canadian activist, and I am joined by my two dear friends. So Zumrate Erkin is the program manager at the World Uyghur Congress, based out of Munich in Germany. But she comes from Montreal, though actually really she comes from East Turkestan. And yeah, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And also Mandy McKeown, the director of International Tibet Network, a long-time Tibet campaigner and activist. We've known each other for 23 years.
Wow.
Yeah. She was originally working at the Free Tibet campaign in London. And I've just discovered that her background is not just Scottish, but it's Irish. So it explains a lot about why Mandy is here with Zumrate and I, a Uyghur and a Tibetan, on this call to talk about this podcast episode to talk about our favorite subject, Beijing 2022 Winter Olympic Games. So, it is, if you can believe it, January 21st, 2022, and we are just 2 weeks away from the games. How are we feeling?
Oh,
such a good question.
Overwhelmed, mostly tired, but also still hopeful for what's to come in the 2 weeks that we still have. Just because we never know what might happen tomorrow. I mean, all the government boycotts that were announced, they were kind of announced within 2 weeks. So, I mean, who knows, right? So I think we're just exhausted, but we're ready for the next 2 weeks to come.
Mandy,
so at 6:30 a.m. this morning, I sent a message to my dear friend Zumrate and said, on a scale of 1 to 100, how exhausted are you feeling today? And she replied, 8.
Wait, it was 100? I saw 10.
You're doing
100.
In that case, 80%.
We are exhausted. It's been a really, really long kind of campaign, even though we actually haven't been doing it for that long in the grand scheme of building these really intense global campaigns, which is what this is. Yeah, we're tired, but we are really buoyed at how well the campaign's gone in a lot of aspects. These boycotts by governments are quite incredible. But what's really incredible is this coming together of all of these different movements. I mean, it's totally inspiring to see Uyghurs and Hong Kongers and Southern Mongolians and all the Chinese dissidents kind of really coming together, as this massive, strong force. And really understanding that us supporting each other, all these different movements, is the way for us to have success. It's really, really heartening and inspiring and exciting to know what we've got moving on to in the future as this solid force.
And so just for listeners who haven't been following every detail, how long has the campaign been rolling for, and this coalition been working together? Mandy?
Well, I mean, there were a few aspects to it, really. So we did do some work back in 2015 when the bid was happening. We did a very kind of small scale but strong campaign to try and press the IOC to not be ridiculous and once again give it to China. However, our calls fell on deaf ears, unfortunately, and then China did succeed. But then, we kind of went quiet for a while. Certainly the Tibet movement felt very much that after 2008 and really driving that incredible campaign back then, which took a lot of energy and a lot of, force, there wasn't a huge appetite for working on this as a campaign within the Tibet movement, insofar as to say that Zimratai and I were both at a meeting in late 2019, and it was suggested then that this was a huge opportunity and our movement should be really making some solid plans. And groups were not interested. They basically thought, no, we've done the Olympics, we've been there, don't need to do that one again.
You would think.
Wait, yeah. Which meeting was this? Which meeting was this?
This was the meeting in Dharamsala. This was the TSG meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I stood on that stage and said, Beijing Olympics is like 2.5 years away. Come on, let's build a campaign.
I remember.
Nothing.
I missed that one. I was not there, but I'm glad that Zumrate, you were there. What was the thinking at that time of the World Uyghur Congress, or of Uyghur activists? You were there just as solidarity with Tibet movement, or were you seeing the Olympics as an opportunity then that you were going to work on?
Well, for sure. I was there just to represent the World Uyghur Congress and also like the wider Uyghur movement in Dharamsala. It was my first time actually. Dolphin just sent me there because he was banned from entering India. So I'm actually
right. He was banned. Why? Could you just explain why the head of the World Uyghur Congress, the most wide-reaching and representative exile Uyghur organization, was banned from entering India?
Because of Chinese pressure, for sure, because he had Interpol red notice against him for almost 20 years, which was lifted finally in 2018 with the work and advocacy of FAIR International and, of course, our group. But, of course, this was put on him because he was accused by the Chinese government of being a terrorist for just, defending Uyghur human rights internationally. So because of that, even though his travel ban was, not travel ban, but his Interpol red notice was lifted, he was still being denied to enter India because of the pressure that Indian government was receiving directly from the Chinese government. So that's why I was sent there, and I'm actually really glad because I got to meet Mandy and so many others that actually we work all, together in this campaign now. Like Mandy, Pema Doma, Gloria, John, everyone was there. So it was really an opportunity. I think when Mandy now I do recall that for us, it was always like considered a big opportunity, Beijing, because at that time the World Uyghur Congress had already started their own campaign. So I remember at the time my former colleague Peter, he started this petition, No Rice, No Games, within the Uyghur movement. And that was kind of considered as a new thing in our movement. And because I don't think there was so much involvement from Uyghur groups in 2008. But the No Rice, No Games petition was launched in July 2019. I was in India in November 2019. So at that time, that topic was, very new and still very attractive to a lot of people. And I think when Mandy mentioned that, I was like, I think, we should really use that as an opportunity as well. And I think that's when really things kicked off as well.
And just to step back a little bit, so you're coming to that meeting as a employee, a staff member at one of the few staff members of the World Uyghur Congress, and your background, your road to how did you get there? What was your pathway to that moment?
To keep it short, I was born and raised in Urumqi, the capital of East Turkestan, which is, of course, also called the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region by the Chinese government. I left when I was 10 years old with my family to immigrate to Canada, Montreal, and the first time that I went back after immigrating was 2009, and it was during the July 5th Urumqi massacre that happened, and we arrived 2 days after the, all the incidents started, and it kind of lasted over a week. So we were there in the midst of it, and it was the first time that I experienced directly some sort of racism, because we were racially profiled at the Beijing airport. My mom was taken into interrogation, and throughout the summer, when we were in Urumqi for the summer, we had to we were in lockdown basically, because we were too scared to go outside, because Uyghurs were being harassed and also chased by the police, and a lot of people actually disappeared over that summer, especially the ones that started the peaceful protest movement. Everyone was enforced disappeared, and missing, and detained, imprisoned, and I just saw really awful things. And I had this feeling that, Uyghurs in our own homeland and country were being treated as nothing. You could see that there was a lot of tension. And so that really, I think, opened my eyes. And when I went back to Canada, I promised myself to really learn more about, what Uyghur meant, about my identity, because growing up in Urumqi, I guess, I was never in touch with that, because the Chinese government tries to suppress exactly that feeling of, your own identity and history, because for them there's just one group, which is being Han Chinese, and the other ethnic groups have to basically identify as Han Chinese as well. But so in Canada, for me, it was mostly coming from my dad as well, just teaching me about Uyghur history. And so I got involved little by little in my own community, and then just over the years just got really into it. And I studied international relations and law, so that really pushed me as well, which landed me a position at the World Congress full-time in 2019, which then sent me to India, which then opened a lot more opportunities as well.
And Mandy, how did you get into
Where
this?
did I come from?
Why for 2 decades are you still working so damn hard for Tibetan freedom and independence?
So where did I come from? I kind of left school when I was quite young. I was 16 when I left school. I didn't stay on and study. And I travelled quite extensively and spent a long time in India, as young people do, and met a number of Tibetan communities in my travels, and was just really inspired. And then I went and did a very strange degree at the School of Oriental and African Study, where I did social anthropology and South Asian studies with Hindi, of all of the degrees that one could choose. And I learnt the sitar.
I love knowing that. I had no idea. That's awesome.
That's amazing.
My poor husband had to listen to me learning the sitar. And he's still with me after 30 odd years. So there you go. And I did this degree. I found myself, finding out more about Tibet and becoming a Tibet supporter. I was a supporter of Free Tibet campaign in London, and then suddenly there was a job, and I applied, and I met the then director of Free Tibet campaign, the wonderful Alison Reynolds, and we hit it off literally, the moment we set eyes on each other, to be honest with you. And I worked there for quite a long time. I was probably there for about 7 years.
From what year?
I joined on the 3rd of January 2000, which was also the day that His Holiness the Karmapa arrived in exile in India. So my first day was kind of this really interesting, this huge holy, Lama from Tibet had escaped, and it was all over the news. So my first week was really interesting and amazing, and it just gripped me. I think once you understand the situation, about Tibet, and you understand how amazing the Tibetan community have been, not just in exile, who are obviously huge inspiration to me, and I work really closely with the Tibetan community, the majority of my team, both in the organization, but also people I work with are Tibetan and teach me amazing stuff every day. You can't fail to be inspired, to not be inspired by them. And, the thought of not working in the Tibet movement is something that I can't even imagine, to be honest with you. And I don't think my family can imagine it either. It's a huge, huge part of my life now.
So lifelong missions, I think for all of us. And I actually go back to that moment, Zumrate, you were saying, 2009, you were in Urumqi for that incredibly important moment that really, in a way, changed the course of history for the Uyghurs and for the people of East Turkestan. We, at that point, had the Beijing 2008 Olympics campaign had already come and gone. We'd had the Tibetan another Tibetan, countrywide uprising, in 2008, starting in March, in the lead up to those Olympic Games. And gosh, by that point, Mandy had been in detention in Beijing. I had been in detention in Beijing for short periods of time. All of that was over by then. It's crazy to think of the long road we've been on. We'll talk about that in a minute, but just to say, so we've all come together. Folks have been working so hard on this campaign. What are the highlights, I guess, for you both? Where do you feel like, and the lowlights? what are some of the more difficult or terrible moments? I can think of one or two for us.
Well, some of the highlights are also the lowlights, though. In a strange way, as in, like I said earlier, we did do this part of a campaign in 2015 to try and stop the games being given. But the IOC, we wrote to the IOC, we tried to get meetings with them. They entirely gaslighted the Tibetan movement during that entire time. They never replied to our letters. They never invited us for the meeting that we wanted. A lot of the time their response was, if somebody else ever asked them, they'd say, we speak to Human Rights Watch and we speak to Amnesty. We don't need to speak to people who are affected by the occupation. So they gaslighted us for all of this time until in 2020, we slightly randomly decided that we'd write another letter to the IOC, which was signed as a cross-movement letter, and it was our first cross-movement. It was the starting point of this whole campaign, and I think we had about 160 rights groups sign on to this letter. We weren't expecting much. We thought, we'll send it to them like we do, and we'll send a media release. And funnily, the media release, really piqued someone's interest, and the interest was with Stephen Wade from Associated Press, and he wrote a piece about the fact that this cross movement, coalition had come together, written this big letter to the IOC, and we made major global headlines. And then the IOC sent us a letter and they said, we'd like to meet with you. And they sent the letter to me because I was the lead signatory. And I responded to say, that's great, you're finally going to meet with us. I'm going to bring some people with me. And initially they weren't, they Zumrata, initially they were like, I'm not sure, I think we just want to meet with you. And I was like, no, I'm sorry, I'm just a representative. You need to listen to the people whose voices count. So that was a highlight, that we finally got this meeting. However, the meeting was a real low light, because of their response. And I'm actually going to let Zimratai talk to you about the response from this initial meeting that we had with them. Can you remember it, Zimratai?
I mean, I remember as if it was yesterday. It was just, I wish I didn't, because it's always, whenever I think about it, it's so cringe in a way, because I felt like, I remember the feeling that we had before going into that meeting, and feeling that we had accomplished something, because they hadn't replied to, to civil society groups working on this issue for years. And it was kind of like the first time they were meeting with the affected communities. And so we were like, oh, we're actually, achieving something great, at least getting a meeting. And we were hopeful that they were gonna listen to some of our pleas. And also we have concrete recommendations for them, concrete steps they could take. It wasn't just like we were going into a meeting to talk about human rights violations, because everyone knows what's happening. If you pay attention a little bit in global news, our mission was to actually achieve something tangible out of this meeting. And then I just remember going, I think maybe 15 minutes after in the meeting, I was like, oh, they're just having this meeting to say they met with us and just get it over with, because they're clearly not interested in really changing anything, even if they have the power to do it. And the first minutes of the meeting, this vice president was just saying, the world is a complicated place. I mean, how do you start a meeting with affected communities, especially if within, that coalition, there are people who have lost everything, their country, their families, everything. And you say the world is a complicated. How condescending, how patronizing is this, especially coming out of a mouth of men telling, I think we were mostly women in that call from our side, telling us that, it's a complicated place. Yes, it's a complicated place. We were fully aware of that. And this is why we're sitting here, to tell you that you have the power of changing these, things and make it less complicated. So I just remember we were all so incredibly outraged by that reaction and by that comment. And I don't think that, his other colleagues, because they were, I think, maybe 5 from their side and 5 or 6 from our side. And none of them said anything that was, relevant or meaningful in regards to some of the things that we were asking them to do. Of course, they said that, they sympathize, but that basically giving us the message that it's not their job to care about human rights. Their job is to organize a successful Olympic Games, no matter what it takes, no matter if, despite a genocide going on, despite all the human rights violations, that it's not within, the remits of their work. So that was my feeling. I felt after this meeting, we all felt outraged for sure. Yeah, I agree that they were rattled.
Well, you certainly made progress on our attempts from 2008 to have any kind of engagement with the IOC, because the lesson of the experience of the 2008 campaign, which lasted for years before 2008, was they would not meet with us. They would not talk to us. At the time, the president was Jacques Rogue. Oh my gosh, the arrogance that oozed off of. Only when we ambushed them, like in Beijing once, I was able to try. No, actually, he didn't. I wasn't able to get to talk to him. Only in Olympia, I think, when Tendor got right up into in front of the news cameras into his face. Only when we sort of popped up and they unexpectedly had to sit down with us because anything else would look terrible. They absolutely flatly refused to ever really engage with anyone from the Tibetan side at that time. So this,
which is slightly strange, seeing as that, there was this incredible Tibet uprising happening, and they still refused to meet with the Tibetan movement. It's quite incredible, really. Their arrogance that these voices just don't matter.
Yes, a senior PR person met with us in Greece after the uprising had happened, and it was, very whatever. It was just, of course, to say that they had and kind of make us go away. But I'm struck by what you just said, Zumrate. Like, we had concrete suggestions and a plan when we met with them, that things they could do. And that's kind of what always gets me about, well, anyone working and engaging with China at this level, but the missed opportunity that if any of these big corporations or, governments, of course, but, the IOC, these big organizations, if they, rather than just bow down to the Chinese authorities or just live in fear of Beijing's wrath, if they just took a stronger position, if they just really tried and were more creative and strategic, if they cared anything about the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, human rights, anything, Chinese rights, they could actually be a force for good on some level. And they just don't try. They have their position.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's them not trying is, and having this same old rhetoric over and over and over again that, the Olympics is separate from politics, and we all know that is just not true. There's not an ounce of truth in that sentence.
I heard an academic, a sports historian or someone on the radio the other day saying, not only are sports and politics related or connected, but they're married with children. I thought that was excellent. It really, this is
brilliant.
Just, it's ridiculous to try to suggest that they're not, and that the Chinese government isn't using these games. It's not all about politics for them.
I was watching this morning some Xinhua piece about Tibetan kids being taught how to ski in these big groups, possibly kids coming from colonial boarding schools, no doubt, in big groups being taught how to ski and how happy and wonderful it was. I sent Zumrata a couple of pieces about, Uyghur skiers who are possibly going to be in the team, and there was that big piece this week about the US company Borders, I think it is, who are launching their snowboards to for skiers in Xinjiang. It's just endless. The propaganda is endless, and the IOC are so complicit. It is totally unbelievable.
And what about the sponsors and the athletes at this point? I mean, I know it's not popular to put any responsibility on the athletes or to, we've tried to be very careful in not assigning blame or responsibility for what's happened to them, but also, to call on them to do the right thing. But I'm also struck, and maybe I'm just an angrier person at this point, but I'm also struck by just how appalling and horrific and upsetting it is that in the face of actual genocide and crimes against humanity occurring by this, Beijing Olympic host, the Chinese government is actively committing genocide and crimes against humanity against the Uyghurs, and actively crushing and trying to eliminate Tibetan resistance and identity and culture and religion, stealing 1 million, at least now, probably 1 million Tibetan children from their parents, having them live in colonial boarding schools where they are trying to turn them into little Chinese nationals. And they threaten our future of our whole culture and our nation. What they're doing in Hong Kong before the world's eyes, dismantling rights and democracy in Hong Kong. All of the things that they're doing. And yet, excuse me, we are supposed to be really, at the end of the day, mindful of how the athletes feel if they wouldn't have an opportunity to compete in their games. it enrages me. And I'm sorry, maybe I'm not a big enough sports fan, or maybe I'm just too much of a fan of humans and rights and the right to exist, that I think it's appalling. And I think from the beginning, it's always been for Western countries and for a lot of our allies and supporters, I love dearly. It's just so much about tiptoeing around the athletes. Please. Like, it just, I don't know. I cannot stomach it anymore. And I do feel like they have a responsibility, and they are complicit. And I'm sorry for that. It's the IOC put them in that position.
It's like we don't have value,
Yeah.
We're not human beings. We're just, yeah, it's just, like you said, it's hard to debate on this topic so explicitly, because there, as you've mentioned, there's just so much sensitivity around athletes and their participation. And every time I hear, a podcast about Olympic Games or interview, everyone is just like defending the athletes. And I'm like, but what about defending Uyghurs and Tibetans and millions of people, innocent people who are, suffering and dying, being sexually abused and raped? Are these lives not worth like debating over? Like, thinking about them, isn't that also part of our responsibility, like moral and legal responsibility? And like you said, I feel sorry for athletes for being, in the first place, being in that position, put in that position by the IOC. But at the same time, there comes a time in your life where you are, you are faced with difficult situation and you have to make a choice. And this is the time, you're facing, a genocide. I don't know, if I was an athlete and I was competing, I would honestly rethink about it, like about my participation to these games. Like, am I willing to go there and be used by not only the Chinese regime, but also the IOC, this corrupt institution,
which they know,
basically
is corrupt.
Sport wash,
hear it in there.
Sport wash human rights abuses. And it's just, for me, it's just, that's a red line, and whoever is willing to cross it and look the other way is complicit, like you said. And that includes sponsors, broadcasters, athletes, whoever,
Yeah, and it is that complicity, isn't it? Is the issue, because anyone who watches it really is complicit, because by watching and getting the rates up for NBC and the BBC, China can say, well, people don't care. People aren't bothered about what's going on, and it's just simply not true.
I was driving in my car the other day listening to one of my favorite talk shows on the local NPR station here, and there was an NBC sports journalist on who, said some kind of whatever scathing comments about China, but then it was like, okay, well, let's get to that. Let's get to the athletics. Let's talk about, there are going to be some incredible athletic achievements here, and let's just focus on those for a sec. Who are we going to watch? Who's on your radar? Who are the people to keep our eyes on? And I just had this moment of rage and disgust, and just that, as our work is hard, and we have to keep going and be realistic no matter what. But we also, I think, do this work because we believe in the best side, at least the better side of humanity and people, and just that the games are going ahead. And even in a progressive town like Boston, people are kind of like, oh, well, okay, too bad. So let's talk about the sports. It makes me just ill and so pissed off, to be honest. And I wonder now what's left to do. What can we do? What's this all been about?
I think unless COVID entirely takes over Beijing, they are going ahead. and there's very little that's going to happen that's going to stop this roller coaster of a propaganda piece now. But it doesn't mean that the movements aren't still acting. You know, we have a number of global days of action coming up, with literally protests around the globe targeting NBC, you know, NBC and their outrageous complicity in spending a fortune to be able to put on these games. I mean, how much are they spending, Lauren? Can you remember?
I remember the grand total of some multiple billions of dollars for the rights to
Isn't it 4.5? I was reading this yesterday. I think it's like 4.5 or something.
The exclusive rights to however many.
Billion, yeah.
Six.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's that. They're still being targeted. BBC in the UK is still being targeted. You know, a company run on public money is going to be, you know, broadcasting the genocide games. It sticks in the back of my throat. And I love the BBC.
Yeah, same for me and the CBC in Canada. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so there's that. So there's stuff going on. People have no way in a million years given up. You know, we are still there and we are still getting the message out. And there will be Tibetans, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, Southern Mongolians on the streets. The biggest action is going to be on the 3rd, you know, 3rd of February, the day before, and our voices will be heard everywhere around the world, you know, even in Latin America, you know, and these groups have always said, oh, you know, we don't have a Winter Olympics team, but they are furious now and they are out on the streets on the 3rd of February to definitely ensure that everyone knows that we're unhappy about this. And we're kind of, you know, still calling on athletes to, like we were just saying, to look at themselves, you know, really? So you were threatened this week by the Chinese government. They put out a threat that you will be punished if you say free Tibet, or you say free East Turkestan, or you say freedom and democracy for Hong Kong. You'll be punished. I mean, really look at yourselves as an athlete. Is that what you want? Is that literally what you are expecting to happen when you go out there? I mean, it's maddening.
I think that they should still say something. I think if they all did it? What if the entire U.S. Olympic team spoke out? Or multiple countries? It's called multilateral action. It's not the kind that we normally work with. But, you know, that's the stuff that I feel like there is always something that can be done. And actually, in this case, in the 2008 games, we were there. Mandy, you were there. We were there multiple times in Beijing in a different time before Xi Jinping, where we were able to take some space and protest and speak our truth and try to shine a light on the situation in Tibet, and call attention to China's massive, gross violation of human rights everywhere. And we had multiple teams taking action and who were then detained and deported. And it was a different time. And those kind of actions this time, we haven't really even considered them because the cost, we would have no protection. I mean, what we've seen them do, the Chinese authorities do to people like the two Michaels from Canada and others, you know, we know that they would take a very hard line. But the athletes
are under protection.
Exactly. The golden athletes are there with all of their, you know, basically all the protection, all of the privilege and protection, and the IOC, the NOCs, you know, they have an opportunity to say something and do something. If anyone's going to be safe, it'll be them. And if if more than one person speaks, if many of them speak, then at the very least, if they did that, I don't think the Chinese government is going to be tossing athletes in jail. Are you kidding me? They're
No,
bad and they're crazy, the Beijing regime, but they're not that bad and that crazy right now. They know what these games are about. They're just going to they're going to try to make it go away as quickly as possible. And they'll just...
But do you not think that they've made this threat because they are terrified that someone's actually going to do that? Otherwise, why even bother? Why even suddenly make this statement and make all of this headline news around the world unless you thought that that's what's going to happen?
Yeah, definitely. They care about, our campaign and everything that's been happening around these games. So they're watching, and I agree with Mandy. If they didn't, why would they all of a sudden, out of the blue, just threaten athletes openly and explicitly?
Let's close with the best that's come of this. So where we are now, knowing the story is not over, it's not written completely yet, but we can kind of see where things are going at this point.
If you just Google Beijing Olympics, I don't think the first thing that, that's going to pop up is going to be about the actual games. It's going to be about our movement and our, campaign. Yesterday, No Beijing 2022 or Boycott Beijing these, hashtags were trending on Twitter all day. So I think that we've kind of got used to making headlines every other week or every week almost, and having, stories about our campaign every day, but it's not actually, something that's so common. So I think we should really be proud of that and managing to redirect, the spotlight on human rights issues rather than the actual games, because that's the feeling that I've got, working on this campaign since 2020, the journalists, interests are just, they're just harassing us at this point. So I think that's really incredible that we've achieved to do this. And despite the fact that no athletes have announced that they would be boycotting, a lot of athletes have actually recently came out with, statements of support or saying that at least they know what's happening. I don't think that that's just out of the blue. I do think that our campaign had a lot of impact, especially at the government level as well. So yeah, actually I'm quite proud of this. And even though the games are going ahead, I think that we've managed to achieve an incredible, victory, just making sure that people talk about human rights issues instead of the games.
Yeah, I concur with everything you just said. I think one of the biggest buoys from all of this is that as movements, I think we all now entirely understand what solidarity is, and I don't think any of these movements will ever feel alone again. They won't feel as though we're just campaigning on Tibet, we're just campaigning for the Uyghurs, we're just campaigning for Hong Kong. Everyone is so kind of intertwined and understands what that means now to be able to work together. And for me that's been incredible to watch and see. And yeah, I'm so glad that we've been able to do that, because I think it will undoubtedly lead to a huge amount more success, because strength in numbers, they can't keep us down anymore. And that's really exciting. And some people may say, the games are still going ahead, so how were you successful? Well, we were successful, as you say, Zimrata. We have hit the headlines over and over and over again. And we didn't even actually have a campaign plan when we started, so for us to do that, and for us to have been, so active and have so many, individual parts of the campaign all come together that we have made as a coalition has been truly inspiring and has been massively successful. And we know that over the next month, because we've got 2 weeks till the games opens and then 2 weeks of the games, we will continue to make those headlines for the next month without a doubt. And, it will always be remembered as the Genocide Games.